Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we talked about American tanks and tank destroyers in Tunisia, and the campaign in Tunisia. We're now on to how the enemy tried to block our tanks in North Africa. November 1942. Attempt to slow up the Americans. A view of one of the streets in the shell-shattered town of Suez, in which the enemy had placed tank obstructions in an effort to slow up the advance of the Allies. In the campaign for Tunisia, there were considerable tank losses on both sides. The enemy was able to maintain himself in his forward position by the use of extensive air power and delaying tactics, and it was not until the spring of 1943 that the conquest of Tunisia was to be completed. This picture shows vividly the scene of desolation which greeted the Allies in the captured town after the Germans' retreat. And we can see they have these these blockers basically all down the road, slowing down any tank that would have to go through here. And obviously a lot of rubble from destroyed buildings they just kind of threw in the way because, well, if it'll slow them down, it'll slow them down. Gives you the advantage and also helps you reposition in a way that you are actually able to fight the enemy effectively. Italian prisoners on march. November 1942. The war ends for them. Headquarter Company of the 1st Division United States Army escorting Italian prisoners of war seized during the Tunisia advance to a stockade outside the town of El Guerta in North Africa. In the picture on the right, Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark, then a Major General, who won in North Africa and Italy, is shown watching some of his troops marching up the front. On November 27th, General Clark received the DSM for his feat of slipping into French North Africa from a British submarine and conducting the preliminary negotiations which opened Algiers to American occupational forces. This was the second instance of official recognition bestowed upon the 46-year-old officer since the North African campaign started. The first was his advancement from Major General. Yeah, having a good general makes it a lot easier to do anything here. Because if you don't have a general that's willing to both use arms and armor as well as his words, not always the best general. Obviously, there are good generals, just military-wise, but I am personally, this is a personal belief, I think a good general should also have good negotiation skills. Yes, obviously, battles and things like that are very important. You need to be able to win. But also having the ability to negotiate your enemy into a ceasefire or defeat is just as effective, really. Red Army stands firm in the Caucasus. Or the Caucasus. November 1942. Fighting in the Caucasus. Ever since August 1942, the Germans had fought desperately to reach the oil fields of the Caucasus. After crossing the Kerch Straits from the Crimea, they reached the Black Sea port of Anapa, 20 miles northwest of Novorossiysk. And on September 1st, another enemy force had already penetrated the mountains protecting Novorossiysk from the north. On September 11th, following a week of violent battles, the great naval base was evacuated by the Russians, Soviet Marines cooperating with the Red Army, and supported by the Black Sea Fleet. Held the enemy's drive along the coastal road towards Tuapis, the Germans were unable to put the Soviet fleet out of action. Despite its losses of important bases, consequently, they were prevented from landing large invasion forces on this front. Meanwhile, the German army is advancing south to Tuapes through the mountains from Maikop made little progress. The most serious enemy advance was along the northern mountain slopes of the Caucasus towards the Gronzi oil field. This came from the Germans' grasp this came within the German grasp until on September 8th to 12th, they were halted on the Terek River by the Red Army. The Germans then brought up large Alpine troop reinforcements to attempt an outflanking movement through Nalchik towards Ordiz. Oh boy. I'm just going to show you the word because I cannot pronounce that. Ordiz Hokiades. I'm not that doesn't sound right, but you saw the word. At the end of the Gregorian military highway, little progress was made, and everywhere the enemy attacks were repulsed with heavy losses. By October 30th, the Red Army had to withdraw near Nalchik owing to the pressure of the numerically superior enemy forces, and the town was evacuated on November 2nd. But the Soviet positions on the Terek River held firm. It appeared that the Germans were trying to break through at that town I said earlier and gain control of the outlets to Gregorian and Ossetian military highways. By November 5th, the advance beyond Nalchik was checked, and the approaches to that Ordiz, we'll just say Ordiz, held. The pictures show a Red Army patrol in the mountains. Yeah, the Germans really wanted those oil fields. One of the big problems that they had was just lack of oil for their war machine. And it slows them down many times because they can't be more liberal with their tanks because they have to keep them in reserve because they're just running low on oil. The need for oil will hamper the enemy. Now, I don't think the Germans would win even if they had all the oil that they needed, but their need for oil does make it very hard for them to ever win this war because they don't have the supplies to supply their war machine. The Russian army takes the offensive. November 19th, 1942. Germans retreat in the Caucasus. After weeks of fighting, the Red Army regained the initiative in the Caucasus on November 19th. Their decisive victory near Mozdok lessened the serious threat to the Gronzi oil field. Here, the Germans suffered a crushing defeat, losing 20,000 men killed and wounded. Booty captured by the Soviets included 140 tanks, 70 guns, 84 machine guns, and 2,350 tanks. The map shows the extent of the German push and the line at which they were forced to retreat 3 months later. So here we see this is all German territory that they pushed into, and they got all the way right to here. There's Gronzi, there's the Gronzi oil fields, and they were stopped here and then had to retreat further back. Yeah, the Germans will never get these oil fields like they wished. They got close, so close, but they just couldn't get it. They couldn't push through. For their sake, that's probably very disheartening. Germans retreat under Red Army pressure. November 20th, 1942. Russian reinforcements move forward. On November 20th, the Russians, continuing their offensive in the Caucasus, repulsed 4 enemy counterattacks and wiped out a whole battalion of crack Romanian infantry in a sector to the southwest of Mozdok. In the neighborhood of Ordez, we'll just say Ordez, the enemy were now in full retreat, abandoning one position after another with hardly a fight, while trying to retire into the cover of the mountain forests. The battered German divisions left behind thousands of dead and quantities of equipment in stores. Meanwhile, fresh Soviet troops, trained for winter warfare, were sent from the east to strengthen the Red Army's powerful offensive on this front. The pictures show above a column of Soviet infantry passing through a valley in the Caucasus Mountains. Here we go. Yeah, these troops are Siberian troops that they're talking about, and they are trained for the cold. They know what they're doing, and they are honestly probably some of the best trained Soviet troops that they have. And so they bring them from the east because the Japanese are not declaring war, which they didn't really have the ability to on the Soviets. They didn't have the supplies to even fight the Americans and the Australians. So, and then here we see the picture below. German soldiers reaching an important rail siding only to discover that the oil tanks had been set ablaze. Yeah, and that's another thing. Every time they did get to a place where there could be oil, they found it set ablaze because the Soviets decided, no, we're not letting you have it. You may have beaten us, but you're not getting this oil. And it would take a long time to either A, put out these fires, or B, drill new holes to get to get to the oil. So they just were never getting this oil. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a comment. Tell me what I can improve on. I always appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.